I'm Matt Hagman, and this is Opportunity Miami, a podcast about people and ideas shaping Miami's economic future. Miami's climate tech community continues to grow, whether it's being home to companies building electric car charging networks or more sustainable ways to air condition your home. But what about blue tech, where innovation and technology meet our oceans and waterways to build next generation companies and create jobs? For the past 2 years, Daniel Kleinman has been leading an effort to make Miami a blue tech hub. He joined us to talk about the journey thus far and what's next. Daniel Kleinman, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so for our conversation, want to go back. Summer of 2020, a little more than 2 years ago. You have been off in San Diego. Of course, you grew up in Cooper City. You're from South Florida. You decide to come back, and you're going to get your master's at the University of Miami. But you also have with you a business plan for something called Seaworthy Collective. What was that plan? And why did you want to launch it here?
Well, honestly, everything started with community building. I am from South Florida, as you mentioned, and I never saw the opportunity to really do impactful ocean innovation work here. And on one hand, I got an amazing chance to explore these blue tech hubs or ocean technology hubs between San Diego and Boston in my time in industry. But there was never really that opportunity to really do the work for the right reasons. I was primarily working in the defense field, and I saw that Miami was really a unique opportunity where those entrenched interests that dominated my career didn't really apply here. And so when I accepted my offer to go to University of Miami for my master's in exploration science, I saw this opportunity to leverage a university and community to help me really build out this ecosystem here and just start to create those opportunities that I couldn't find elsewhere.
So, as we go through our conversation, there'll be some things we double click on and just be sure we're clear on. I'll be the one who needs to be sure that I'm clear on what we're talking about. When we talk about blue tech hubs, what are blue tech hubs? What goes on at them?
Yeah, so first we need to understand what is the blue economy, right? And that is really any and all economic activity around the oceans, be it aquaculture, shipping, cruise lines, doing carbon removal, which is kind of one of the newer takes with seaweed as an example. But really, it's understanding the ocean as an asset. And then blue tech is, of course, the technology that's involved in that. And while a lot of people think on the engineering side, we're also seeing this emergence of nature-based solutions as, quote-unquote technology as well.
So what did you, as you're thinking about bringing a blue tech hub to Miami, if I understand that was the idea.
It's a stake plant that Miami could be a blue tech hub.
Could be a blue tech hub. With Seaworthy Collective, and when you were launching, what was it that you hoped to do?
First and foremost, it was just to create the opportunity. When I go back to early days of Seaworthy, just to understand what was mission accomplished, it was this opportunity actually exists now. And when I talk about what that is, it's really the first accessible opportunity for anyone from any background, no prerequisites, just to be able to get into the ocean innovation space. What a lot of people don't know is it's a very exclusive space. There's typically these silos that we all perpetuate, thinking we need to have a marine science degree or PhD. But even beyond that, I mentioned I didn't even have the opportunity to really do the work being in industry, right? And the little funding that is there for doing oceanographic research, which I had the chance to do at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, they literally couldn't afford to hire me back after my internship because they literally didn't have the means. And so, when we look kind of bigger picture at the field, it's really these systemic barriers that are preventing people both inside and from the outside from having that opportunity in the first place to do this work. And so before we even talk about solving climate change, sea level rise, overfishing, plastic pollution, and more, we really need to figure out where are these opportunities for the future work even existing in the first place.
So now it's been 2 years, and of course we're going to get into now the 2.0 of Seaworthy Collective. But walk us through sort of how it's since launching Seaworthy Collective. Walk us through some of the highlights.
Absolutely. Well, first off, as you mentioned, moving to Miami in 2020, I actually accepted the offer to come to Miami the week before COVID hit, and then came here, just started virtually community building by assembling panels of experts in my network and making them accessible to people. We had on our first panel a guy who's a former diver for National Geographic, and then another guy who actually piloted an underwater vehicle that found a sunken treasure ship off the coast of Colombia.
Wow.
And we had about 30, 40 people and just immediately saw that it stuck. But as we kind of turned the corner to 2021, I learned about the venture studio model, which really kind of hit the nail on the head of the problem we wanted to solve. When we get back to that lack of accessible opportunity, what Venture Studio allows us to do is co-create startups by building interdisciplinary teams. And that was the opportunity where we said, we want to build, basically be kind of like IDEO, right? Where we're building these interdisciplinary teams, bringing not just marine science backgrounds, not just engineers, but people of really diverse different backgrounds together to build these startups. And at the same time, as we started to put that opportunity out there, we also had early stage startups coming to us and saying, we don't have anywhere else to go. We need this opportunity as much as anyone else does. And so that was where we kind of created this, I'll say, liberty on the Venture Studio model, where we saw the opportunity to serve both in kind of 80-20 format of working with existing startups and co-creating startups from the ground up.
And when co-creating startups, that's where someone comes to you with an idea of some kind.
They don't have to.
And they don't have to, or you together come up with an idea, and then you actually bring the people together to help build it. We talk about co-creating. That's So, okay. So talk about so you've had now 2 cohorts, 20 total startups. Talk about some of the problems these startups are focusing on solving.
Yeah, so it's really, our focus is across 6 different verticals. So we call them our opportunities for sea change. And it's not just about these individual verticals, but also how they all work together. So we focus on biodiversity impact, so things like aquaculture or seaweed farming. We focus on greenhouse gas removal, so a lot of carbon sequestration work, again, happening in the seaweed space as well. Coast resilience, of course, like living seawalls and Kind Designs, who are 3D printing seawalls. Also measurement, reporting, and verification. So anyone working on sensors like SmartFin in our last cohort, who had a surfboard fin that basically crowdsourced data through surfers for water quality. And then plastic pollution removal, of course, that's a major issue for the oceans, but not only downstream of getting it out of the water, but upstream and how we prevent it from getting there in the first place. And finally, water quality, which is really how do we get pollutants out of the water? And the cool thing is a lot of these solutions aren't just one vertical, right? I mentioned seaweed twice there, and actually it applies to water quality as well. And so it really is, how are we hitting all these different impacts to start really seeing tangible betterment of our oceans that has an economic driver? That's one of the other key pieces, is this isn't just restoration work. That's been philanthropy. This is actually scalable economic development through doing service for the environment.
It's really important, I think, to let's hover over that for a second. So the idea here is that on these 20 companies, that they're solving problems in a way that is that addresses things like coastal resilience or plastic reduction and removal or limiting greenhouse gas emissions, but doing it in a way that actually it is a viable enterprise. It is creating jobs, it's driving economic growth, it's expanding opportunity. It's sort of the confluence of both sustainability and economic growth.
Yeah, and I think the best part is, and what our approach really is about how do we bring them together, right? A lot of these programs are focused on one vertical and accelerators and incubators. But for us, we say it's how do we cross these verticals to actually create meaningful relationships. So we had a sea cucumber farmer in Panama and a seaweed removal boat actually in our first cohort. And we said we could actually pair the seaweed that they're capturing with the food source that the sea cucumbers needed, and they have a supply chain, right? And overall, the concept in our space that we see evolving is these holistic value chains, or basically how do we go from one end of the supply chain to the other with either net negative emissions or different ways that we're making sure we're doing positive for the environment throughout.
So of these 20 companies, I guess 2 questions.
Yes.
One is, were there a common set of issues that you found many of them were confronting? And 2, are these companies right now that are continuing to build and are out there here in Miami, and I assume elsewhere too, working to solve those problems?
Well, I think I'll go high level and then specifics. I would say one of the biggest problems is the early stage, not only ocean space, but climate space is still very young, and there's not a lot of capital around. And so, it is, the number one struggle is, of course, funding. But the specific problems, that we see them solving really, range from all these different impact areas. But I would say the one core thing is that we focus on finding that scalable component, right? And that our entrepreneurs are thinking differently about solving these problems. There's a lot of people doing plastic removal work, but how many are doing it in a way that incorporates either a technology, right, or a practice? We had a startup in Hawaii that actually has open source vacuum pumps and basically wheelbarrows for sifting microplastics out of sand and water. And on its own, they're just doing beach cleanups in Hawaii. But paired with one of our other startups who's collecting marine debris with autonomous surface vehicles, they can literally create their supply chain by separating their marine debris and plastics, right? So I think it's that these startups are all individually building these pieces of the value chain, and it's how we start to build those connections that really is a big problem that needs to be solved in this space. Culturally, the marine sciences has not been as collaborative as it should be. And I think that's one of the pieces that we really are hoping to drive as we look forward to the future of this space, where there's no competition in saving the planet, right? It's how do we bring people together who understand what's at stake, and most importantly, understand the opportunity that collaboration can bring when we actually bring these different solutions together rather than keep them siloed.
Got it. Okay, so now let's spin forward. So community building, panels, community engagement, building a network of people here in Miami, 20 startups, both through co-creating, as you described it, but also through people who came to you with a going startup. And by the way, these are companies that are both here in Miami, but elsewhere too, and participated.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. And it's showing that actually we can bring these companies to Miami, right? That they see an opportunity here. And most importantly, that it's not just here, but actually our region, right? That we need to connect what technology we can develop here with the Caribbean, who may not have access to those same resources.
So now 2.0.
Yes.
So now this next phase of Seaworthy Collective. Tell us from these learnings, what's now, how are you thinking about spinning this forward?
Well, starting out a little meta, we were a startup helping other startups,
sure.
right? And it was, honestly, with our first cohort, we were very transparent in saying we were figuring it out as we went, building a plane as we flew it. With cohort 2, which we just wrapped up in July, we really saw how our program has been formalized. We had our first full-time employee come on who really helped create the structure that we needed to know that we can start to scale this and grow this out. Most importantly, we had to figure out our own structure, which we had been exploring this hybrid for-profit, nonprofit model, but really realized for the short term, everything needs to be housed under our nonprofit. And so that's been one of our big developments. But overall, it's the formalizations of our programs. So we basically have 3 principles, which is our community programs, our social and educational programs, and then of course our startup programs. And so today we're announcing our startup programs with our new founder mentorship program, which is our first year-round accessible program where we're giving kind of bits and pieces of what the venture studio experience would be, but just making that more accessible and giving more startups the shot to really build out our pipeline. And then number 2, that our next venture studio cohort is going to be launching in March, and we're starting to accept applications for that. And our goal is that we're going to have at least 2 cohorts next year with 30 startups in total. That's our raising the bar from the last year and change. And then beyond that, it's really putting our first opportunity out there for people to partner with us. We've been bootstrapped, grinding it out, just proving that this could really happen here, right? And with 20 startups under our belt, we know Miami now really has this momentum for blue tech. And most importantly, people see the value of not only the solutions, or what the value of the solutions can be for our community, but how the community actually can be involved in building the solutions. And I think when you kind of look in the scope of Miami Tech, that's a really important disconnect that we're bridging. 8 out of the 10 startups we work with are current or existing startups, and then 20% of the startups we literally build from scratch from the bottom up.
I see. Got it.
But the cool thing is that at the end of the cohort, we have our startup showcase, where both the co-created and existing startups pitch side by side, and our goal is you can't tell the difference.
Nice, nice. Now, as we think about sort of the climate tech space, right? And, well, I think going more broadly, think about sustainability, right? As you think about that, is this something that can really be solved largely through innovation alone? Or are you someone who is advocating for policy changes as well?
So when I met Mayor Daniela Levine-Cava the first time, I actually told her, innovation can help drive policy rather than the other way around, and got an immediate eye roll. But that being said, we really see, especially in this space, just a lot of antiquated policy. And we have also seen some neighboring organizations pop up, literally saying we can pilot in places like the Bahamas versus piloting here at home, right? And while on one hand, it's great that there's immediate opportunities for getting these technologies out there, on the other hand, There's no reason why we shouldn't be addressing, red tides and algal blooms here, or of course, what looming storm surge could do, like we saw on the West Coast with Hurricane Ian. We need to pilot these technologies here now, right? Or really 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. And so how do we help drive that? And I think it starts by literally showing people they're knocking on our door, right? That we have 3D printed seawalls in a warehouse in Wynwood right now that are waiting to be deployed, but deploying elsewhere rather than deploying here. Even planting seagrass, right? And seaweed, seagrass, they're all amazing carbon sequestration tools. We could literally be harnessing carbon credits in Biscayne Bay with seaweed if we were able to really plant it. But I know there's a lot of political barriers to that. And so we need to be thinking about educating people, really, that's where it starts with, on what is this opportunity so that we can then support it with the policies to drive the innovation or really scale the innovation here. And again, what I get back to is that core piece that Miami is different than so many of these other coastal cities where the defense and fossil fuel industries really have such a stranglehold on where that innovation goes. We don't have those barriers here, right? And so we really can build these technologies that not only can be deployed here, but the Caribbean and really all of the Gulf of Mexico, when you think about it, as just a starting point. So, when we talk about a regenerative blue economy at Seaworthy, you've already heard some inklings of how we stitch together solutions. It's more than sustainability is very much rooted in mitigation and not necessarily solving the problem fully. And at the same time, it's usually about single solutions that are siloed. The regenerative approach is really about how do we bring these solutions together and really work to solve problems at their root, not just cutting carbon emissions, but actually reversing them. But really, when we look ahead to what the future of this space is and why Miami is uniquely positioned beyond just what I've already said, I actually see the future of this space being where we need to first fully understand what the impacts we are creating, right? Measurement and verification. The oceans, we've explored more of the moon and Mars than we have our own oceans, right? And it's one of the greatest opportunities to truly understand our global impact in leveraging the oceans as a climate solution, which I love to say we're terrestrially biased. And of course, nowhere is more affected by climate than Miami. And so looking ahead, the future blue economy isn't just driven by these solutions, but also the value of impact. And what's the most unique about Miami that I'm excited about and looking forward to rolling out, hopefully with a future fund, is how Web3 actually could be a major player in this. And so Miami really could be this place where we're creating these mechanisms that can be deployed between blockchain and actually in real life deployment of solutions to measure and value impact and create a local economy that actually is doubling down on valuing the direct impacts and creating the real ecosystem we need for these solutions to scale.
When we talk about a regenerative blue economy, what is that?
So really, to me, it starts with these systems of solutions, as I mentioned, but it's about solving problems at their root. It's really about having this holistic approach of not only creating opportunities for impact that are accessible, but valuing impact as a whole, right? Sustainability right now is built on offsetting primarily, right? Where we say we can still do, as long as we're doing as much good as we're doing bad, that's okay. Right, and net zero is still kind of the bare minimum, right, that we should be aspiring for. It's not actually solving the problem. Once we get to net zero, we've stopped the bleeding. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean we fix the problem, right? It means we're no longer going to get warmer, but we're not also getting back to where we need to be. And we know, for example, that once we get to, I think it's 2.5 degrees Celsius of warming average, all of our corals are going to die off, right? And so not only do we need to stop it before that, but then if the corals are going to regrow, right, we need to be able to bring that back down. So that's really what the regenerative approach is. Sustainability is the stepping stone to regenerative, but if we're not thinking more ambitiously now, we'll never get there, right? Because for the oceans especially, sustainability isn't necessarily practical anymore. It's really understanding and getting people out of this out of sight, out of mind mentality that we need to go, all the way on fixing it, not just half.
Your specific focus is around blue tech. And the whole idea of making Miami a blue tech hub. What does the innovation map look like right now?
Well, first to say, I think climate tech has been kind of the dark horse in the background. Mm-hmm. I know when even Mayor Suarez came out with his right to win verticals for Miami, it was health tech, fintech, which are kind of the obvious two, and then climate tech. Yep. We've really seen, I think, just this convergence point where people understand this is a thing, this isn't going away here, shifting the narrative of us being the victims of climate change to actually starting to do something about it with tangible, scalable solutions and not just talk and policy. But I think the biggest thing is, and even what we see in the climate space, is there's a lot of these funds popping up and not enough places for them to go, right? And so that gets back to, I think, some of the work we're doing where we need to build out this pipeline, right? And there needs to be this investment in the local community, not just bringing startups and solutions from elsewhere, but how do we bring the local community up with us to build these solutions in the future of this space?
As we think about it right now, is it San Diego and Boston, are these sort of right now the leaders as we look around, or even take us around the world?
Yeah,
are there
so
places globally?
When it comes to blue tech, I mean, Europe's been kicking our butts. There's a great map of the global distributions of blue tech startups, and I mean, specifically Norway is the main ones who are driving it.
Yep.
But really, to me, they've had a government that's been very supportive of with policy and really creating these hubs for ocean innovation. But even domestically, I say Boston and San Diego, but it's a very different focus there, where I think although there is of course livelihoods based off aquaculture and and sustainable fishing, there's also a big defense tech focus there. I get back to that whole thesis that we are in such a unique position here, and that to say we're kind of an uncorrupted ecosystem, if you will, we really have this opportunity to change the narrative, not only for climate and oceans here, but really on what it looks like to take action.
And if I also hear you right, you're also saying that need to continue to work to democratize the space, because blue tech, I think it feels intimidating, right? It's sort of very science. And if I hear you correctly, your point is that we can make this really accessible, and that people across our community can be developing ideas and building them on solutions that are really transformative.
Well, and I think, I kind of almost want to challenge the notion of saying it's blue tech, because so much of this gets back to restoring nature with an economic driver, right? Thinking about things scalably, not just planting mangroves because it's good for the environment, but planting mangroves in a way that's scalable and leads to further economic development. And I think that as we start to stitch together what these solutions can mean, not only for our resilience, but more importantly for the development of our local economy in this space, we'll really see that we can build this model that can scale globally here. That's our whole mission. And we are already seeing other players looking at coming to South Florida saying there's real opportunity here. And for that, I can say that stake in the ground actually has started to reach fruition.
Wow. Innovation as it touches water and the seas, you're that guy.
I think it's an interesting dichotomy, because yes, it's like yes and. I think a lot of people don't realize that oceans means climate, right? There's a fundamental disconnect or I say terrestrial bias, really, that climate innovation has to occur on land. That planting trees has gotten the biggest focus when we literally can't plant enough trees. So how do we help people understand that we are definitely the blue tech focus, but it's all under the umbrella that ocean should be the greatest driver of climate, right? It's the biggest heat sink on the planet and one of the biggest carbon sinks on the planet, and people forget about it as a climate solution. So how do we understand that it's an asset really, that can be leveraged and valued in service of our climate?
Yeah. It's interesting too, and your approach, that so many of our biggest challenges in the environment, that your thesis is that there's actually an economic solution.
Not only that there's an economic solution, but that the technology for the most part already exists. I think we are still working on the measurement and verification aspect of it, but for a lot of what we need to do in this space, it's pretty simple. It's instead of unsustainably fishing, we need to be focusing on aquaculture, right? Instead of always putting seawalls, some of it should be mangroves, right? Or instead of dredging, we need to be planting more seagrass. It's not all nature-based solutions. There definitely needs to be some tech. I mentioned, for example, autonomous boats that are cleaning our marinas, but it's really how do these things actually overlap rather than separate, right? And as we can create this convergent point that I think Miami really offers to be this playground for ocean innovation that, frankly, again, has this uncorrupted ecosystem, I think it's really a major opportunity for us to lead in this space as a result.
For people who want to plug in, you mentioned one of them already, but A, go to your website, and
yes.
We'll ask you to share that in just a second. B, there's a happy hour. C, there's a Discord channel.
Yes.
Talk about the different ways that people who want to plug in and connect can.
Yeah. Well, so first off, obviously our website, seaworthycollective.com. We have our monthly happy hour, which is also on our website, called the Climate Community Social Hour, now that we've been hosting at Glassbox Ironside. And then other than that, we have our Discord, which on the bottom of our homepage, if you submit that, it will take you to our Discord, which is our online community. We're always working not only to do in-person events, but also virtual and hybrid events to try to keep our community beyond Miami engaged, because we are a global community. And last but not least, we have our blog, which really allows us to tell the story of where we've come from and get people caught up who may be just learning about us on opportunities to partner and other ways to join us as we move along.
In this work, obviously, fundamental is that it must be by, for, of the entire community, right? And obviously, climate gentrification is a real thing, right? Talk about how in your work with Seaworthy Collective, how you're working to make this something that creates access and opportunity across our entire community.
Well, one of my biggest lessons learned in the last 2 years was just because you create an accessible opportunity doesn't mean it reaches the people that need it the most, right? And so I think there's still a lot of bridge building to be done, and we've definitely seen just how hard work it is, and we definitely need more team members dedicated to be able to really build out what we want. But the reality is, my experience in industry, I saw one woman on my team of 25 when I worked for the Navy, and a lot of the blue tech space has really been a diversity desert. Right. And so we're really
very white.
Yeah.
Very male dominated.
Yes.
Yeah.
And if you ever go to any of the big conferences, it's just a lot of old white men and very little futuristic, inspiring talk, a lot of perpetuation of status quo. And that's still very much in the academic culture that we see in the space, and part of the culture change that we're trying to drive. But more importantly, it's that our community, our team really represent what the future of this space is, right? And that it's not just diverse in backgrounds, in ethnic and racial backgrounds, but also in disciplines, right? And that we have people who have anything from theater majors to marketing degrees to, to even finance backgrounds on our team. It's this intentionality that not only are we looking to build partnerships with the community, which is one of our other, I would say, big asks actually today, is just to say that we know, we need to just put the ask out on that, but also that, we're looking to make sure that it's not just people that look like you and me that are leading this next generation of technology, that it has to be, it takes, again, establishing these role models that this is what the future should look like. And honestly, one of my favorite entrepreneurs that we worked with, although I'm not supposed to pick favorites, so maybe we don't record that, but
among the favorites.
Among the favorites,
yeah.
Was Nicholas Key of Key Farms. He's a Jamaican seaweed farmer, and his story was so powerful because when we look beyond Miami and the impact that we can create, he actually is working with fisher folk in Jamaica who actually can't even provide for their families because overfishing is so bad in Jamaica that they've turned to lives of poverty and crime. And the work he's doing is to literally give them the opportunity to farm seaweed for carbon credits and helping regenerate the environment and create sustainable livelihoods to literally pull them out of poverty. And when we think of that level of impact, just imagine what we can have here, especially in helping to hopefully reverse climate gentrification and maintain the integrity of our communities of color that have been here for so long, and really should be able to maintain that with access to those opportunities that have so far been very out of reach.
We always like to end with 3 takeaways. So as we think about sort of the 3 things that should be top of mind for anyone who is interested about how Miami can become a blue tech hub, what are those 3 things that should be top of mind?
I think number 1, community. I'm going to go to our 3 pillars on this one, honestly. To me, it's community first and foremost, that there are people here doing the work, there are people here that want to connect and support each other. Second, I think it's truly opportunity, right? One of my biggest gripes with the marine science space is education that doesn't lead to opportunity, is an opportunity wasted, right? And so we are creating these opportunities, and we really need the support of the community to continue developing these opportunities so people can take that shot and take the leap into entrepreneurship. And then I think the last one really is just collaboration. I think the understanding of, especially here in South Florida, just what's at stake for us. We don't need to look too far to see what happened in Fort Myers, right? We need to be able to come together and build this quickly and start implementing now. And so how can we, to your point earlier, work on changing these 3 paradigms that will enable this implementation of solutions and actually people to do the work in the first place that can help us really build up a globally recognized hub.
Daniel Kleinman, Thanks so much.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you so much.
Opportunity Miami is powered by the Miami-Dade Beacon Council. This episode was produced by our editorial manager, Suzette LeBoy, with special thanks to Clutch Content Partners. You can reach us with your story ideas and feedback at next@opportunity.miami. Thanks so much for joining us.